Friend, Shabbat Shalom again. I'm finding this mask tonight to be so warm.
Why don't you take it off?
No, it's very, very, very warm, but I'll live with it. And you have fancy new N95s. They're
Yeah.
black, and so it's black and white, and the contrast is.
Yin and the yang.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who's the positive force, who's the negative force, but it's quite a tension here. Friends, I love the festival of Sukkot, and which we are celebrating this week. It is my favorite holiday, and I don't say that like I'm a child. Really, theologically, spiritually, every part of me believes that Sukkot has a message to me and to the world that is very important. In Rabbinic Judaism, it was the most important festival. It was more important than Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, whatever other festivals exist in Judaism. Sukkot was the great day where in ancient time, people would make these grand pilgrimages to Jerusalem, and there was this carnival atmosphere, and the Talmud even says that the rabbis used to juggle, and it was just a remarkable time. And Sukkot is considered to be so important that it is called HaChag, the festival. One of the key ingredients of Sukkot is building the sukkah, as I spoke about last week. Building a sukkah every year for our family is one of the great joys of our year. And indeed, when Jane and I may have made decisions over time where we would live, one of the questions we would always ask is, did the house have sukkah potential? Meaning, was there an area where we could build a sukkah? Because that was a high priority. If we couldn't build a sukkah, what was the point of having a house? What was the point of having the house? Now, building a sukkah is something that is commanded in the Torah, and as I mentioned last week, the sukkah has 3 walls, or in special situations, 2.5 walls. According to tradition, it's supposed to be at least 3 feet tall, and it should be in a position so that all or part of its roof is open to the sky. So building it under a tree would not be permitted. According to tradition, it is covered with branches of trees or with reeds, which are detached from the soil. And we are also told that the shade must be greater than the light. And according to the tradition, one is to live in the sukkah during the 7 days of Sukkot. And if that's not possible, at least one should eat one's meals in the sukkah, which we as a family try to do. Now, what do we learn from this beautiful agricultural festival? There's no one explanation, but here is how it relates to me, especially this time of the year and this period of time. We leave our homes and are surrounded by nature during Sukkot. We're told literally, get out of your nice homes, go into the world, and dwell in this hut. And the engagement of nature through this hut is to raise our consciousness. We are to become more aware of the natural world in which we live, and there is an additional element. The sukkah is by nature flimsy. The walls are relatively unstable. The roof leaks. A bad storm can destroy it. That has happened to us. All right, when I was in college in upstate New York, in Ithaca, New York, at Cornell, we once had Sukkot. It was a late fall. It snowed on our sukkah, and we then had to make a decision: were we going to stay in the sukkah, or were we just going to have icicles on ourselves? I'm not exaggerating. A bad storm can blow the sukkah down, and thus the sukkah allows us to confront nature and all of its instability and all of its surprises. The purpose of the sukkah, therefore, is to teach us this delicate relationship between human beings and our natural surroundings. In our homes, we can turn off nature. We can turn on the air conditioning. We can do whatever we want. We can pull down the shades. Rain or shine, summer, winter, we live in these climate-controlled environments. But in a sukkah, We are confronted by our relationship and dependency on nature itself without any security filter. Now, this year, I believe that Sukkot comes to raise our consciousness about the future. And as we leave our homes and take a good look at the world, we see that we're destroying it. We are, as a human race, do not seem to care enough about the world that we live in. And as I share this with you, it almost seems trite because to me, I've been thinking about this so much and it's self-evident, but sometimes it's important to state the obvious because the obvious is what's going to impact us in years to come. We face, and I use my words very carefully as I always do, I believe we face an existential threat to human life. I believe that global climate change is a reality and a potentially catastrophic. Study it, read it. Let me share with you just some of the little tidbits that help us paint that picture. For example, by all estimates, June 26th through 29th, heat wave in the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia this past year was essentially unprecedented. Seattle hit 108 degrees. Portland spiked at 116 degrees. Canada broke its national temperature record 3 days in a row, hitting 121 degrees on June 29th. An analysis conducted by the World Weather Attribution Group, which specializes in computer modeling, said that the extreme heat wave would have been virtually impossible if it wasn't without the influence of human beings on the climate. A conservative estimate from the U.S. Forest Service said by 2015, fire season has gotten about 2.5 months longer than it was in 1970s. And the 9 largest wildfire seasons since reliable records began have occurred since 2005. The Greenland's ice is melting faster than any time in 12,000 years. This statistic is just, it's hard to just get your hands around it. It says, the ice loss in Greenland is running at a rate of around 1 million tons a minute since 2019. 1 million tons a minute. Based on conservative scenarios, global sea levels is likely to rise at least 12 inches above the year 2000 level by the year 2010, by the year 2100. And if we take the worst projections, it is very possible that the rise in sea level could be 8.2 feet above the year 2000 levels. Now, I'm sure you missed this. In Iceland, they held a memorial service for a melted glacier. And I don't know if you can see it on the camera. I have the headstone here that they put for the glacier. It's both in the Icelandic language and in English. Let me read to you the gravestone. It says, "A letter to the future. OK," which is the glacier, is the first Icelandic glacier to lose its status as a glacier. In the next 200 years, all our glaciers are expected to follow the same path. This monument is to acknowledge that we know what is happening and what needs to be done. Only you know if we did it. August 2019, and then it has 415 parts per million CO2. I guess that was the level of carbon dioxide in the environment when the glacier melted. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the analysis of satellite imaging dating to 1979 shows that warming has increased the likelihood of a hurricane developing into a major Category 3 or higher with sustained winds of greater than 110 miles an hour. The past decade is likely the hottest the planet has seen in 125,000 years. In the year 2020, the North Hemisphere saw its hottest year on record, 1.28 degrees centigrade above the 20th century average. Now, I could rattle these statistics on and on and on and on. You just Google them. I could read them for the next 24 hours, and the list would still be very incomplete. So here is the reasonable argument from the latest reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And I know there are people out there who say, oh, this is just a lot of hyperbole and whatever. It isn't. And I'm not a climate scientist, but based on 14,000 scientific studies endorsed by 97% of the climate scientists, endorsed by 195 governments, which state how climate change is altering the natural world. This is what it comes down to. Humans have already heated the planet by roughly 1.1 degrees Celsius, largely by burning coal, gas, oil for energy. That's indisputable. The report states that atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide have not been this high in at least 2 million years. Here is what all this means. If the increase in the world temperature reaches 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level, scientists state that we are in a dangerous place. Nearly 1 billion people worldwide could swelter in more frequently life-threatening heat waves. Hundreds of millions more would struggle for water because of severe droughts. Some animal and plant species alive today would be gone. Coral reefs, which sustain fisheries for large strips of the globe, will suffer more frequent mass die-outs. The hotter the planet gets, the greater the risk of crossing a dangerous tipping point, like the irreversible collapse of the immense ice sheets in Greenland and West Antarctica. This topic goes well beyond a Friday night sermon, of course. But my point is, the evidence is there. It's not crazy people making wild statements. It's the most serious, most conservative, the most thoughtful atmospheric scientists, 97% of them, who look at the facts and look at the models and say, we're in trouble. Saving the earth is not just some fad. It's a religious obligation. It always has been for the Jews. There are numerous Jewish ethical statements supporting our obligation to protect the environment, and we can study them at another time. But this statement, found in the Midrash from the 8th century, I think summarizes the entire Jewish worldview on this subject. It says, here's what it says. It said, God led Adam around all the trees of the Garden of Eden. And God said to Adam, see my works, how good and praiseworthy they are. And all that I have created, I made for you. But be mindful then that you do not despoil and destroy my world. For if you spoil it, there is no one after you to repair it. The Midrash is warning us, human race, you have one chance. You've been given this gift. What are you going to do with it? You're going to preserve it and love it and protect it, or squander it. Our Jewish concern here is self-evident. We know, we've heard, it's these things fly around the news. We know of the Paris Climate Agreement. And this was a goal that was established. Limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. And as I said, we are at 1.1 degrees and continuing upward. To achieve this long-term temperature goal, countries must reach global limits of greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible to achieve a climate-neutral world where maybe we could stop it where it is and potentially to reverse the trend. But is there the will? This is a challenge that the world has never had to face. It's not just about getting rained on your sukkah or getting your sukkah blown down. This is fundamentally, how do we as human beings relate and connect to the world? And considering how poorly the world responded to the global COVID-19 threat, I'm concerned that we don't have the collective will to address this. But here is where I believe on this Shabbat of Sukkot that I can just raise three issues that are worth speaking about and reflecting upon. First of all, consciousness raising. It's a problem. It's critical to the future of the human race. Enough anti-scientism. 1.5 degrees Celsius, that's all you need to know. We cannot go above that temperature, period. That has to be a global goal. And if you're a human being, I don't understand how you can't see that goal and say, okay, we know what the limit is. We're not going to go above it. Second, we can't accept business as usual. And when you look at the political structure of our country and in other countries, it seems that often there is talk about it ideally, but then other interests get involved, then the things that we need to do get watered down. For example, I know Senator Manchin of Kentucky wants to save coal jobs. That makes sense. But he also wants to preserve his stock portfolio in addition. But could he stop for a moment and think about a way of addressing this issue that transcends the interest of his state and looks at the needs of the entire world? I'm asking a lot of him and other politicians, but that's what it's going to take. The world is on a precipice. Isn't there some way to transcend self-interest? If the human race is endangered, leave your house, go into the sukkah and open your eyes and see what actually is happening in this world. And third, I'd like to suggest to our congregation that we open a conversation about this within our own community. You know, there is an organization called Dayenu, which is one of many powerful Jewish organizations that deal with the environment. And they have reached out to me, and I've reached out to them about creating one of what they call Dayenu circle within our congregation so we could kind of spearhead this kind of Jewish consciousness raising and action in our community. And if any of you would be interested in being part of that, I would ask you to contact me at rabbi@thenewreformedtemple.com. It's Sukkot. We celebrate the beauty of nature. But if we enjoy it and don't work to save it, we are simply ignoring our traditions, and I have to say it, we're just a bunch of religious hypocrites if we don't take this seriously. That is not a title that I would be proud of. Moadim l'simcha, a joyful festival of Sukkot. Shabbat Shalom.